Well, thank you all. Welcome to this program from the Commonwealth Club World Affairs. We're really glad that you're joining us here tonight, whether you're here in the room with us or watching or listening online. And a special thanks to club members who are here with us. You can learn more about the benefits of membership as well as the club's upcoming events calendar at commonwealth.club.org. I'm Sydney Johnson. I'm a reporter with KQED here in the Bay Area, and I will be your moderator here tonight.
Yeah, you will. I hear you, Topher.
And it's really nice to see so many familiar faces, both in the audience and to be here with Carly, who's our special guest. She is the founding editor of Huffington Post San Francisco Bureau and the former editor-in-chief of the San Francisco Examiner. Tonight, we're going to be talking about her new book, which is out in the lobby, I'll Try Anything Twice, Misadventures of a Self-Medicated Life. It launches today, and we're so glad that she's here to tell us all about it. So Carly, thank you so much.
Thank you. I was so worried I was going to cry. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Wow.
I want to first also just level set with the audience on a couple things. This book deals bluntly with tough topics that might be difficult for some people to hear, including suicidal ideation, depression, drug use, even cheating. Please take a break from the conversation if you need to do so. And also a little insider info that Carly used to be my boss.
Sure was.
She was my editor at the San Francisco Examiner, and I remember the day when she announced that she was pursuing a book. And so it's just a real full circle moment to be here with you. I'm so excited to have read this story and learned a lot about you outside of the professional setting.
I mean, mutually, I feel like you would be my boss today if I ever went back into the full-time journalism world. It's been such an incredible ride watching you go over to KQED and be on the radio. And PSA, Sydney is moderating a congressional debate that's going to be really spicy in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that on my Instagram.
Great. Yeah. So Carly's going to read a passage for us in just a moment, and at the end, we're going to have time for Q&A. You all have cards on your seat. Folks will come around and collect those if you want to write a question, and then towards the end, I'll read some of those out, so start getting your questions ready. But before we get into the passage, Carly, I want to ask you a little bit about, the writing process and also just what made you decide to pursue this version of telling your story in particular? Reading this, there are such highs and lows. Some of it seems like it's straight out of fiction, a jungle cult.
I wish.
It's so much, Adventures at Burning Man, all these epic tales. Why did you decide that memoir was going to be, your first approach into writing a book?
That's a great question. I was thinking about this recently, and I don't mean to call her out, but my beautiful, wonderful, perfect agent is in the audience. And when I first called her and was like, I want to do a book, she was like, Carly, you don't want to do a book. You either need to do a book or you're not going to do a book. That's how it works. And so I remember I knew I wanted to write a book. I knew I needed to write a book. But at first I was like, oh, maybe I'll do fiction. Maybe I'll write this polyamorous love triangle against the backdrop of the pandemic. Ew, barf. And I left my job at the Examiner knowing that unless I cleared my schedule of all obligations, this book would never happen because I was so scared to do it. It was this burning need/giant fear that I almost didn't admit to myself. And so for my first few weeks of unemployment, I basically ran errands. And then when I ran out of errands to run, I begged my housemates if they had Amazon packages for me to return or if they had any appointments for me to make. And finally, when I ran out of I got COVID, and then finally I had nothing left to do. And so I basically locked myself away in a cabin and started outlining this awful fiction book I thought about writing. And then I just started outlining my life, which was a really weird experience. And I ended up sending this 20-page scribbled outline to this same incredible agent, and she's like, okay, yes, that's your life, but I'm sure a story in there will emerge. And as I started, I then wrote a treatment, basically a 30-page, this is the story of everything that basically started with, I was born. And I kind of realized in that process, I'm also a prolific outliner because as a career as an editor and not a writer, that's just sort of how my brain works, even though I never end up following the outlines. And so somewhere along that timeline, I was like, all right, I gotta start with this travel stuff because that's where the story really starts. Like if I want it to be a story with a beginning, middle, and an end and not just, word vomit about my entire life, I've got to think about when this particular story began and when it ended. And for me, that really was when I kind of left everything behind to go on this adventure, but was not tending to my blossoming mental illness at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of took shape from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, with that, I would love if you could read us a passage from it and
Sure.
get us started so folks have a little sense, and then we'll dive a little bit more into those travels and other parts of your story.
Great. Okay. So I realized today that I had to pick a passage to read. And at first I was like, oh, well, the prologue's like the dramatic, teasy, like jungle cinematic part. But since this is the Bay Area, and because this book is dedicated to my two closest friends, one of whom flew here at 6 a.m. to be here, and the other one who couldn't be here, but I think is on that live stream, so hello. I'm going to read you their favorite passage. They read, not only did they convince me to do this book because they knew I needed to do it, but they read every single page as I wrote it. They saw all the horrible first drafts, and the first draft of this, they were like, we love this scene. So it takes place, the second half of the book takes place living in an intentional community in San Francisco. Maybe they just love it because they're both in it, but I don't think that's the case because they don't like attention as much as I do. So to set the scene, a lot of my life there was so absurd it bordered on parody, but I also just have a lot of tenderness and love for it, and anyone who lives in the Bay who's ever been in a intentional community might relate to this. So I guess I'll just get into it. Every year, Theodora hosted what she called a conscious conflict resolution in our living room. She brought in an outside facilitator, and each resident committed an entire Saturday to using nonviolent communication skills in a public forum to process various interpersonal issues that had come up over the past year. This was one of those activities that veered a bit too far on the new agey spectrum for me to take fully seriously. Though Ari and Devin shared my New England-bred cynicism about the Avalon's woo-woo tendencies, even they defended traditions like conscious conflict resolution, which had kept our home successfully operating since its inception. It's not easy to balance the interests of 15 strong-willed people and keep all systems flowing with minimal drama. Nonviolent communication, or NVC as it was known by experts who studied mediation, remained a staunch value of everyone who took up residence at the Avalon. The facilitator, a nondescript woman with strawberry blonde hair and a purple hoodie hugging her slight frame, gathered us in a circular formation where we'd sit uninterrupted, save for a bathroom break, for the next 3 hours. Her commanding voice contradicted her otherwise ordinary appearance. This woman meant business. Theodora, perched to her left in perfect cross-legged yogic posture, nodded along as the woman outlined the rules for the day. No topic was too uncomfortable for discussion. We must communicate using I statements, and please avoid below-the-line behavior. I'm not quite sure what she meant by below the line, but I gathered from context clues that she meant no hurling of insults, placing outright blame, or acting otherwise immaturely. We were a group of consciously minded adults, and conflicts arose in almost every group of adults. So let the conscious conflict resolution begin. The day mostly consisted of going around the circle, naming various issues that had triggered us recently. I wasn't involved in almost anything that was mentioned. I'd been too flattened to participate in many activities that got heated enough to turn into conflict. So I watched from the sidelines, a cement gargoyle perched on a building, surveying the interesting happenings of his city's living, breathing mortals below. I still felt somewhat shy when all the residents got together. Everyone's personality was so outsized already. Collecting them all in one room almost felt electric. I had never yearned to be part of conflict. In fact, I went to great lengths to avoid it in my own life. But I couldn't help feeling a little left out as everyone lobbed their complaints. These complaints, after all, signified the comings and goings of people leading interesting, dynamic lives. Theodora went first. She was irritated that we hadn't yet converted to a fully vegan kitchen. If we were going to live out our collective values of sustainability, how could we deign to pour cow milk into our morning coffee? The agricultural industrial complex was an abomination on our society, and those poor animals had no say in whether or not we could use their byproducts for our own benefit. Imagine how the slaves felt when they first came to America, forced into labor that wasn't of their own choosing, she said evenly with a straight face. That's how chickens feel when we eat their eggs without their consent. Eliza, the Avalon's other militant vegan, nodded along emphatically, her eyes wide with support. Excuse me, did you just compare eating eggs to owning slaves? Devin interjected. Unlike me, Dev was never one to avoid conflict at the group level. My best friend remained confident in all her convictions. That's fucking ridiculous, Thea. I'm sorry, but it just is. Not to mention deeply offensive. The facilitator chimed in her measured voice, calm but stern. This is starting to sound like below-the-line communication, she said. Now, Theodora, perhaps it makes sense for you to describe how it makes you feel when you see others in the house eating eggs. And so the meeting unfolded with similar issues brought to the surface, all of which were discussed at length. Eliza and Drew, who were experimenting with opening up their relationship for the first time, asked for more privacy and discretion when they invited their lovers over. They were currently dating another couple as a twosome and also engaging in intimate playtime separately. I saw someone gawking at Christopher and Jade when we were all making tea in the kitchen, Eliza complained. I'm not going to name names, but it made me feel like some sort of exhibit. I'm not an animal at the zoo. These are my personal, private relationships. The gawking person in question was probably me. I folded my arms and tried to look invisible. Eliza and Drew's relationship was something of a soap opera, and even though it seemed hectic and exhausting from the outside, I couldn't help but feel a little envious. My experience with Robbie had proven to me that polyamory was not something I wanted any part of, but at the very least, Eliza and Drew's experiences were fascinating and energizing and so far beyond my current state of being. And the two of them seemed closer than ever today, sitting next to each other like one attached unit, Eliza rubbing her toes on Drew's ankle. Then it was Devin's turn to voice her grievances. In contrast to what was happening with Drew and Eliza, Devin was now in a monogamous relationship with Nico, her younger soulmate she'd met at Burning Man last summer. Her former live-in boyfriend, Yusuf, now inhabited the room next door. In typical Devin fashion, she and Yusuf had seamlessly transitioned to platonic best buds. In fact, at that very moment, Yusuf sat across from her in the circle, wearing one of Devin's signature bedazzled trucker hats backward on his bald head. Devin maintained close, non-sexual relationships with all her exes. It was one of the many things I admired about her. I hate how everyone seems to be poking around in my and Yusuf's business, Devin said. Everything's fine. We're great. We don't need anyone to weigh in or take sides, right, Why? Yusuf nodded from beneath his trucker hat. Yeah, it's chill. For those of you who know this person. Gregoire cleared his throat. If I may, he began. You may not, Devin replied. It sounds like Gregoire has something to say to you, Devin, the facilitator calmly cut in. Would you like to receive it? Devin sighed. I guess, she sulked, slumping backward against the couch. Gregoire, it's your turn to speak, the facilitator said. I just feel like the way you treated Yusuf was unfair, Gregoire said. Going from an open relationship with him to a closed relationship with someone else feels like a bait and switch. Again, this has absolutely nothing to do with you, Devin snapped. She had a hard time controlling her temper when she got pissed off, which was rare. But when it happened, I never wanted to be on the other side of it. Luckily, I was always on her side. We'd only gotten in one argument over the course of our nearly decade-long friendship. It was back when I lived in San Francisco the first time around, during the Avalon's huge annual Halloween party. Devin's bedroom was closed to the public, and I'd brought a couple friends in there to do shots of tequila. When she opened the door and found us sitting on her bed, shot glasses in hand, she screamed at me. The next day, over mimosas at brunch, we both apologized, and everything was instantly okay again. As the tension continued to escalate between Devin and Gregoire, and the facilitator did her best to keep their interactions above the line, I zoned out. What could I possibly say to this group of lively, engaged, sexually active people when it was my turn to speak? My turn eventually came, of course. Conscious Conflict Day was a radically participatory event. After several more disagreements were brought to the surface, the dishes have been piling up in the sink, Ari pointed out. I'm not going to invite my Midwestern siblings to our Halloween party if there's an orgy room, warned Trevor. All the late night jam sessions on the piano have been fucking with my circadian rhythms, said Henry. The facilitator ended our session with a final prompt. What is it that you really wish the group truly understood about you, she said. A few people said some things I didn't register. I was too busy rehearsing in my head what I knew I had to tell everyone. Then, all eyes were on me. In spite of months of isolation, my fondness for this group of people and our shared home motivated me to be honest. I really wish you all truly understood my depression, I ventured slowly. It's something I have to live with every day. It affects everything I do. It makes moving through the world harder, so much harder. I fought back tears as I continued, feeling vaguely cathartic. Maybe there was some truth to this whole conscious conflict thing, after all. I don't expect you to know what it feels like, but I want you to know that I'm struggling all the time. My confession pulled some sort of internal release valve. I continued, the words tumbling out more quickly. Getting out of bed is the hardest thing I have to do, and I have to do it every single day. So if you see my door closed for long periods of time, I'm probably inside, probably in bed, probably trying to figure out how I'll possibly get myself to keep going yet again when everything hurts all the time. I hiccuped back a few tears. Ari moved over and put her arm around me. Then Devin crawled across the circle and gave me a big hug. Gregoire followed suit, wrapping Devin's hug in his own. Eliza and Drew circled their arms around Gregoire and Devin. Pretty soon, everyone in the house had piled around me, squeezing me tight. Even Yusuf, who hated physical affection, was patting the throng of humans with his hand. The facilitator beamed from inside her purple hoodie. This is what community is all about, she said. This is unconditional love.
Thank you so much.
I remember that moment so viscerally. It's bizarre to be reading it to a group of people now that there's a book about it.
What does that feel like, reading that right now? Yeah.
I'm just stuck on the eggs and slaves comment. It's just so abhorrent. I'm like, I can't believe I said that out loud. Like, even when I wrote it, it was like, but I'm writing from memory. I'm not going to name names.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So this, for folks, I know there's probably a few people here who have had the pleasure of reading this book already, but just to kind of put this in a timeline, you had just returned to SF and started living in this communal living situation in San Francisco after your journey in Panama, which we'll definitely get back to. And I'm curious, for you, like, I met you, like we said, you were my boss. You're this career woman from the East Coast. I just find it hard to believe that you really bought into some of those like homeopathic remedies, ecstatic dance your way out of depression, sort of thing. But yeah, tell me how just being in that environment maybe shaped what you were thinking at that time, and like how that treated or how that affected like what treatments you were approaching.
Yeah. That's such a good question. I mean, I have like nothing but deep, deep reverence for this house. I mean, as you'll read in the book, I didn't even want to move into it. The Devin character, my closest friend, paid my first month's rent, so I wouldn't be, living in my mom's guest room anymore. Thank you, Mom. But, I was 31. And I ended up staying for 7 years. So clearly there was something really magical about it. I'm a pretty cynical person. I will say, I'm from the East Coast, but I'm also from here. I was born in San Francisco. I've lived here a lot of my adult life. It's like my, absolute chosen and inherited home. But that sort of fast-walking cynicism never left me. And luckily, my two closest friends are also from the East Coast, and they also lived there that first year with me. So there was like buy-in in that some of the systems really worked to keep the house functioning. I described it from moving from this like really messy, chaotic, like borderline cult situation to what I called the well-oiled commune. Like, we kept the house immaculately clean for many years. We had, family dinners every Monday that went off without a hitch. The municipal composting in San Francisco like blew my mind when I got here. But also, I think it's kind of like everything else in life. Like, you take what works for you and you leave the rest. And we were just never really shy about being like, on the whole, the sum is greater than the parts and the goods outweigh the bad, or whatever other aphorism I could throw in there. But But yeah, like a lot of this woo-woo shit is like garbage. It just doesn't work for me. With regards to the treatments, I mean, ketamine was really coming up as this like lauded depression treatment. At the time, it was 2016. There were studies. I mean, I don't want to speak ill of something that has really transformed the lives of so many people. And I think the more research and the more dialogue about any mental illness treatment is, you know, the best thing we can do as a society to start having a fighting chance, you know, to reduce mental illness. But at the same time, like none of that really worked for me. And that was definitely like the pervasive narrative, like, oh, psychedelic your way out of this. And like, clearly I wasn't going to psychedelic my way out of this if I was already taking like many other drugs that were blocking the effects of the psychedelics in the first place. And so, yeah.
And I mean, I was struck over and over again throughout the book by just how socially motivated I think you seemed, at least in the book, you know, parties, festivals, travel, cooperative living. But often those highs and those experiences of, you know, doing that like social performance in a way was followed by these lows and days of locking yourself alone. And I know this is a pretty just like black and white question, but would you consider yourself an extrovert?
Great question. I think about it all the time. The definition of extrovert is you get your energy from other people or you're just like loud, because I'm definitely loud. But I think I've been thinking about this a lot, you know, as a sober person who's reflecting on my life and the important, like the role community plays in my life is almost of like a higher power type force. Like belonging is everything to me, my people are everything to me. But I think, you know, and I came of age going to summer camp and going to all-girls boarding school, like really cult-adjacent stuff where we had these like weird songs and weird languages, and I was in a sorority in college. But I think for so much of it, my social life was just a distraction from what was going on in my head, because I was absolutely petrified to be alone with my thoughts. Anytime I wasn't with people, you know, paying attention to what I would say on the outside and how I'd perform to, you know, any number of people, my inner monologue was just constant. Just, you're not good enough. You deserve to die. Like, you're not, like, I couldn't focus on any, like, there was no evidence in the world that would have proven to me otherwise. And I think now that I have overcome a lot of that through abstaining from drugs and alcohol, through finding versions of myself that I really love in quiet moments, I would say I act a lot more introverted than I ever did. Like, it's so crazy to me to wake up on a Saturday morning and be like, oh my God, yes, I have no plans all weekend. I know I'm gonna get out of bed and like fill these days. That would have been unfathomable before. Like, I would either be in bed hiding from the world or out burning the candle at both ends. And now it's like, no, I just wanna stay in and cook, or like walk my dog around a little, or like read a book. And back then it was like I was always trying to measure up to this imaginary scorecard that I was always falling short of no matter what, because the goalposts kept moving to prove to myself that I could never reach them in my own head. It really is a horrible existence to be trapped in a mind that hates itself so much that it can't ever just shut the fuck up and let you relax and be present in the world. And sorry, I don't know if we gave a warning about swearing, but I like don't know how to swear.
There's the warning.
There's the warning. Yeah, and it's just like I'm just so grateful I got to learn what it was like to live as a human being without this. I didn't think it was possible. I kind of, you know, went to rehab being like, oh, well, I've never been happy without the help of drugs and alcohol, so like I don't think I'll ever be happy again. And that first moment I experienced happiness, like just as myself, was like, what is this? This is crazy. Like, is this normal? When's it gonna go away? Like, when's the other shoe gonna drop, you know?
Yeah.
Which is also a common experience, I think, in sobriety.
And the other thing that I was thinking about throughout this book, you have so many of these great little stories of, you know, a warehouse party or like a Burning Man meltdown, you know.
Oh my God, if I never had to go to another warehouse or Burning Man again, it wouldn't be soon enough. So I got that out of my system.
But I also think about like along with your career, you started out covering, you mentioned this in the book, covering some of the protests of the tech buses in San Francisco. And then when you move back, you're boarding those tech buses.
Yes.
And you've just seen so many different, I think, eras and social scenes in San Francisco that this book, especially for our San Francisco readers, like provides such a special lens into this, like, pre-pandemic, like millennial optimism that I think is actually like, it's like nostalgic in a way.
It's totally nostalgic.
Yeah.
I see these reels on Instagram now that are like, back in 2012, when we listened to LCD Sound System and walked down the street. And I'm like, wow, history is, like written already.
Yeah.
And it really is crazy. I mean, it was pre-AI, pre-pandemic, pre-any of that. And just this sort of embarrassment of riches and abundance and excess, but then also this acute knowledge that around us, this this public health crisis was playing out on the streets, the worst, income inequality of the entire, don't fact check me on this, but probably in the entire country. Is that correct?
Probably
You're the reporter now. And we would have these like deep intellectual discussions about like, what are we going to do about this? I think there's a passage in the book even where I try and touch on it. It's like, but how can like 15, relatively privileged, extremely privileged by most standards, people in a house like rewrite the laws of society? Like that's not going to happen. Like, is it you give $1 to someone you walk past? Is it you volunteer at one of the myriad nonprofits that are always fighting against each other? Is it you just remain more aware and you read the news? I mean, I'm such an evangelist for local news. Read your local news, people. Like know what's going on in the city. And I think now I kind of just do that by just engaging with as much of the mission and its longtime community as I can, and kind of working in my own backyard on things like that. But I think back to that era, and it's like, yeah, we're on top of the world, but we're also kind of intellectually aware, but not viscerally aware of just so many other things at play in this bizarre, complicated, beautiful, horrific city that I love, that is my soulmate.
Yeah. And I mean, so much of the conversation around addiction, sobriety, recovery, harm reduction, all of these things, at least in terms of like at the policy level in San Francisco, tends to focus on the intersection with homelessness and the intersection of housing status and also police and law enforcement. And, clearly there's a huge difference in outcomes for people who are struggling with addiction, who have housing versus those who don't. But what do you think about that as someone who did have a bed to come home to, even when you were struggling?
I mean, I think part of it is when you're in the throes of depression, it is just like an equal opportunist. It's like an equalizer in that like I would notice that I'm going to this opulent tech company that like people say is harder to get into than Harvard, and and I'm just like, no, but I don't deserve it. I want to die. And then I get home into bed and I'm like, wait, I have everything and I still hate myself. That makes me hate myself even more. I'm such a horrible person. And then that makes you spiral. So like there's a guilt aspect to it, but then when you come out on the other side of it, there's just this like almost paralyzing amount of gratitude of like, why am I one of the lucky ones who happen to have resources, so that when I was willing to admit that I had a problem that wasn't going to be addressed without taking a good, honest look at my behavior with drugs and alcohol and the root of some of these, issues, then there would be such a soft landing waiting for me and to hold me. And that, I think, it's heartbreaking. I mean, living in other parts of the world where homelessness is lessened, but maybe, income is lower per capita or, median level, you don't see that level of homelessness because the community experience is so much stronger and people take in folks in their family, even if they're all, in one room together. And I think this sort of individualistic mindset in America drives a lot of this, like, oh, well, we don't want to deal with our crazy cousin so-and-so, so we're just going to let them, obviously, I don't necessarily have research to back this up. This is all just kind of observational from thinking about it a lot and being here and reading a lot about the city. But I think I could get into policy level SF stuff if that's what
I promised you we wouldn't have a policy debate.
We can have a policy convo. I think the biggest thing to know about addiction that just kills me with these sort of punitive first measures is that you cannot force someone into recovery who does not want recovery. And so it's, how do we treat the citizens of the world, the people we share this city with, whether they chose to come here or not, with dignity, if they're not willing to take, or if they don't have the wherewithal to take a look and say, this is something I really want to do. Because if it's hard enough for me to admit that I want to get clean and put in all the hard work that came with that, like how easy is it going to be for someone who, doesn't even have a warm bed at night? And so all of that, it just like looking away from the humanity and thinking like, oh, I'm just going to clean this problem up so I don't have to look at it anymore, like really belies the most intractable part of addiction, which is that if you, like, nobody else is going to do this unless you really, really want it yourself. Yeah. Nobody else is going to force this on you. Yeah.
I want to go back to, so the first half of the book, you talk a lot about your travels in Latin America, your experience at an eco-village in Panama, which eventually became the subject of a skewering Viceland documentary. But I want to I have a couple questions about that, but just briefly, can you kind of describe for folks here, like what that place was, how you ended up there?
I had this motto in my life back then. I was running from everything. I mean, I was just like, you can't outrun yourself. It's such a cliche phrase, but it's so true. It catches up with you in the worst way. And I had this phrase I was saying all the time back then, which was, life is weird. I want life to be weird. I'm just going to pick the weird option.
Keep life weird.
I think there's even a horrible cringe line of me on the documentary being like, I chose the weird path. And it's like, when you first get there, I woke up my first morning there and it's like, I'm in a banana leaf hut and there's coffee on this little makeshift stove and there's this turquoise river gurgling in the background, and it's the most beautiful natural splendor I've ever seen, and this seemingly lovely group of people who love living in harmony together in the jungle. I'm like, well, this isn't my, East Williamsburg 6-person 3-bedroom apartment. Like this isn't a job I have to be at for 80 hours a week. Like this sounds interesting. Let me try this weird thing. And to anyone else, it would have been so obvious. I look back on little Carly, I'm like, no, run. I watched the documentary for the first time, like when I was actually going to start writing this book. I had never seen it before. And I had a friend over and I remember I was like, will you just like watch this with me? And we had popcorn and I'm like, I have to watch this thing. And he didn't know anything about my time in Panama. And he sat next to me. And as the story played out, he just looks at me and was like, what the fuck were you thinking? Again, swearing, sorry. And I was like, I don't know. And then we just burst into this full body belly laughter. And like, I couldn't even breathe by the end. I was crying. And it's so funny because at the time I was like, oh, if I ever leave, that will be such a failure. I mean, but basically behind that scenic image of the gurgling river or whatever was this like incredibly messy, incredibly unstructured, incredibly packed, incredibly resource deficient cult. Let's call a spade a spade. I mean, maybe it wasn't Jonestown level cult, but it was not a beautiful, intentional, well-oiled eco community. People were sleeping in like 3-in-a-row hammocks on top of each other, and that was their only like private space. And this sort of megalomaniac guy was at the top of it, and he lived in Panama City and did a lot of drugs. And so I was like, I'm going to live in Panama City too. And I did a lot of drugs, and I would come in on the weekends. It's like, who commutes to your eco-village on the weekends? Like, That's ridiculous. And then this documentary filmmaker comes down, and we're like, oh my gosh, this woman has won Sundance 3 times. And oh wait, all of her former subjects have lawsuits against her. But oh yeah, she'll do a fair portrayal of this. This is awesome. Like all coverage is good coverage. And I left after the first episode, and I remember thinking like, I'm gonna regret this for the rest of my life. This is my chance. And I'm just so glad. Like looking back, I'm like, thank God that my body forced me to leave, because I was so unwell that I couldn't take another step. I just was bodily desperate to, cry to get out of there, or something a whole lot worse would have happened.
Yeah, I mean, you detail in the book how you left because you had an episode where you were contemplating suicide and got very close to that point. And I'm curious, like, if you can remember what it was like leading up to that point, because I think that's actually like a pretty common experience with major depression. It's like, it's hard to see through the fog and,
Yeah.
and see where you're at right in that moment. And we get comfortable in the discomfort. So were you already thinking of leaving, or was that kind of just like the moment that it snapped for you? Yeah.
I think leaving was like absolute worst case scenario. I was also in a phase where I was like clinging to romantic relationships as a way to sort of try to stay moderately regulated, which didn't, obviously work. And the person I was dating was down there, and he really played an instrumental role in getting me out of there, which is, forever grateful for that. But it kind of crept up on me slowly. I mean, it's like, I describe it in the book as, I think, a bathtub filling up where like something drips and then your sandal breaks and you start crying because the idea of replacing your sandals is too hard. And then it's like you stay out too late and you sleep through a morning meeting and you feel so bad about yourself that you can't get out of bed for the rest of the day. But then you get out the next day. And then it's like, oh, you go to a social event and your boyfriend is being more gregarious than you and getting more, and then I start to feel like I can't measure up. So then I get in bed for 2 days and then I start getting testy and then I stop reading books. And then it all just kind of spirals until you realize like, oh my gosh, I'm in a really bad place. But it was still punctuated by these moments of, I mean, again, I'm not a doctor, but probably drug-induced mania or like drug-induced illusion of happiness. And so I'd always think, okay, I can salvage this. Like I just had this dream that I was gonna, I don't know, transform education by being in the middle of a eco-village that I commuted to on a bus, like from Panama City, which, what? And yeah, and then the suicidal thoughts come and then they stay longer. I mean, I have this moment in the book where I'm on the phone with a suicide hotline. And in that moment, I was literally like seeing red. Like I couldn't even, I'm amazed I remember enough to write about that. Just feeling like the closest I've ever been on the brink to like not even understanding what my body was doing or what my brain was, how it was functioning. And yeah, I mean, I think my mind wasn't going to let me leave. So my body kind of forced me to with that final. I mean, the craziest, I've had brushes with suicide, I'll just say it. I try to really normalize that topic because the more I talk about it, the more I realize how common it is and how shameful people, how ashamed people feel in admitting that. It's like such an icky word. You like don't want to say it out loud. And the minute I start saying it out loud, other people are like, oh my gosh, me too. Or my loved one, I don't know what to do about I'm worried for my loved one's safety. But then there's still this sort of stigma where I'll try to mention it in like a glib way and someone's like, oh my God, are you okay? And I'm like, no, I'm okay. I'm just trying to, toe the line of something that's still like extremely awkward. And yeah, I mean, an experience for me with, I would say dozens or at least a dozen, pretty deep moments of suicidal contemplation and a few attempts, and thank goodness I'm still here to tell the tale. There is a relief at a certain point in like saying it out loud and knowing that it happened and knowing that you're still safe. Like in that moment in Panama where I was really on the brink and I had a plastic bag over my head, I was like trying to suffocate myself and like, I don't even think that would, I won't get into it, but I don't see how I would have, but I remember just like ripping the thing off my head and being like, oh my God, I'm still here. And then running to the person I was dating and being like, I need help. This is not okay. And then before I could even think, a nano step into the future, he's like, we're going to the airport. And he's getting me out of there. He's packing my stuff for me. He's putting me on a plane. And I didn't think twice until I kind of landed in San Francisco in a fog. And my mother met me at the airport and I'm in like a Panamanian Xanax-induced stupor, like,
Yeah.
And that's when it's like, okay, wait, now it's time to start actually metabolizing what just happened.
And that kind of gets into the second part of the book where, it takes a little, we kind of get your journey and like being back in San Francisco and some, tales of being back in there. But it's when you start to tell us about the different types of treatments you were going through. And it just seemed like you were, trying just about anything at that point.
Yeah. Anything except for the thing that worked.
Right.
Which is the great irony of sobriety,
I'm curious, though, what you learned from all the failed treatments, though.
Yeah.
Or if you would even call them failures.
Yeah. I would love to have known what it would have been like if I wasn't poisoning my body at the same time in any moment I could conjure in which I had the willpower to be social or be out of my bed when I wasn't at work. It was like party time, you know? I think it's tremendous that these resources are out there. I mean, I've heard so many stories of transcranial magnetic stimulation transforming people's lives. I mean, I think it was stunning that I had access to all of it. I don't know where I, mustered the motivation to keep going. But I would call them, I would say they weren't failed except for the fact that I was failing them in my inability to admit that the deeper problem was this substance abuse. I love that they're available. I love that there's discourse about them. I write about them to show, all the different things that are emerging, that are out there. Obviously anything can go too far. I question certain tech moguls saying they take ketamine all day as medicine, who knows? I mean, for some people, maybe. But yeah, for me, I just would lie to my therapists and providers and conceal the fact that I was really doing a lot of, at one point I had a friend say to me, you really think a gluten-free diet is going to counteract all the cocaine you're doing? And I was like, maybe that's a good point, but I don't want to go there. I don't want to know if that's a good point, Denial is a crazy, and it's such a huge, acute part of substance abuse, You make these deals with yourself, and you try to reconcile with that same mind that is doing the stuff in the first place. So it's what puzzle is that to put together?
And what was the moment for you when you thought rehab was the next treatment that you wanted to try or the next approach that you wanted to try with this journey?
Yeah. Honestly, it was random. It was not a particular rock bottom, except that it was a really, really bad hangover after a series of really, really bad hangovers. And it was just this fleeting premonition that went through my mind of I don't want to live like this. Maybe I need to go to rehab. But then I was talking on a recovery podcast the other day about how even addiction imposter syndrome is a thing. And I remember thinking, well, I'm not bad enough that I would need this. I'm just exaggerating. I'm taking this space from someone else who would need it. I just party on the weekends, I could go a week without drinking if I decided to. And I did, but it was more the behavior when I got my hands on things was, to the point of blacking out to escape this, forever inner monologue. So I actually went to my therapist's office. I write about her in the book. And I told myself after I had that fleeting premonition, today I'm just going to be honest about my substance use and see what happens from there. Because I hadn't been, it was I would go to these therapy sessions and almost consider it a victory if I didn't have to mention it, and then I'd be like, oh, well, I didn't talk about it, so it can't really be a problem. It's these mind games. And so I was I'm just going to give it to you straight. I told her everything. And she's the one who and I said, but I'm not an addict. I'm not living under a bridge. I'm not, doing really the really hard drugs that you hear about. I'm not, hiding bottles under my sink. And she's the one who said, addiction is not one size fits all, even if culture makes it seem that way. These benders you're describing are such a cry for help. I'm paraphrasing. But I think the phrase she used was let's try a full life intervention. And rehab seemed like the best option for full life intervention, just for a full, no holds barred reset on every single way I was living. At that point, I wasn't even getting out of bed until 1 or 2 in the afternoon every day, and taking meetings, for my company under the covers with the video turned off, half awake. Miraculously, I managed to get, the minimum viable done so that nobody really could tell, I don't think. And I remember thinking, if I get out of bed by 11 a.m. every day this week, then I don't have a problem. And then I couldn't even do it by Tuesday. And it's that's not, I think my stepmom said to me at one point, she's the fact that you can't get out of bed by 11 a.m., that's not how functioning people live their lives. And I was just and then I felt really bad about myself again, but she was so right. And it was part of that coalescence that led me to just kind of be honest and own it for the first time. And yeah, and I didn't think, I kind of went to rehab being like, here's the next thing. Like I never could have dreamed that it would have been such a probably the fundamental pivot of my entire adult life. I don't think that's an exaggeration. And it just was. I mean, it just was like my body just sort of exhaled. And I started to gain adult skills without these horrible, what's the word I'm looking for? Like crutches I'd been relying on.
And, the book kind of ends with you discovering sobriety as a tool for handling your mental health. And like you said, kind of this really like change in your lifestyle that affected all aspects of your health and mental health. And it sort of ends with that. It sort of ends with you becoming sober. And you do have an epilogue. You mentioned at least one brief relapse, but we don't get too much into your life after that decision. And, just statistically, many, if not most people who struggle with addiction, who go to rehab, do relapse, do go to rehab more than one time. And so long way of saying, what's kind of the epilogue to that epilogue look like? How do you navigate depression periods today?
That's a great question. I've talked a little bit about recently about how I really wanted like sobriety to be the punchline of this book. So sorry, I just gave away the ending to everyone in this room who hasn't read it. And I didn't want to write like a recovery book about like how I move through, but I'm learning every single day, like, oh, I still have these traits, even though I'm, not miserable anymore. And the relapse is worth noting. I got out of rehab and was like, well, I'm not giving up weed, obviously. And then I smoked a joint and I was like, it's a creativity tool. And I like was cleaning out my room and found a pre-rolled joint and I smoked it and I felt worse than I was almost panic attack level anxiety. And so it was more like, oh, well, I don't want to feel that again. So I'm not going to do that again. And then I was like, you know what? I still feel really good. So I'm just going to like maybe go to a meeting. And then it was like, oh, well, I still feel really good. So I'm just going to not do these drugs. And then maybe I'll enroll in an outpatient program and keep doing this. And by the time I was 90 days into my outpatient program, I remember my counselor there saying, wow, you take sobriety really seriously. And I was so shocked by hearing her say that because I was like, what? I'm not sober. I'm just not doing this. And it was such a revelatory moment of like, wait, I can keep feeling good if I keep waking up every morning and deciding to do this. So that adage of one day at a time just really, I think, applies here. And today, I mean, I don't want to sound Pollyanna, but I just like haven't had a depression. I'm 7.5 years substance and depression free, which is like insane. I know. And for those of you who knew me, like, it's just like, what? I mean, I live in like, there's this tiny little buzzing fear in the back of my head that if it were to come back, but I think I would at least have the tools to really engage with it this time, I hope. I mean, I've had moments of deep, profound sadness. And I think the beautiful thing about being sober is that the sadness, and the beautiful thing about not being depressed is that the sadness is so real. It's like Technicolor sadness, and the anger is real. It's not numbed and dulled by this sort of fog or this, drug numbing or, depression numbing. It's the real Technicolor version of feelings. And I've had bad days where I think I just like let myself get into bed now. It's like I'm someone who needs a lot of downtime. I need a lot of sleep. Before, I was just getting it for like a week at a time after partying for a weekend at a time. And now it's like, nah, maybe tonight I need to reset with like a 12-hour night of sleep so that I can have like a fully highly functioning day tomorrow. And I just kind of let myself and giving myself permission, like loving those resets instead of like hating and shaming myself for those resets, I think is a huge part of it. Remaining curious about how sobriety shows up in my life. I've kind of changed my relationship with 12-step meetings a lot over the past 7 years. 7 years is so weird to say. I try to talk really openly about it because I feel that is like a huge part of staying this way. Right before my book came out, I was having these really, really vivid relapse dreams. But in the dreams, I would never like black out and go on a bender. It was more like I had like one beer and would say to myself in the dream, well, I didn't actually relapse, so I can still publish a book about this. And then I'd wake up in this cold sweat, like, oh my God, did this happen? And I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, totally. A couple of folks in the audience are curious about your writing process, and writing experience. Talk about the experience of writing the book. Was it actually supportive and part of your journey at all, and how?
Yeah, great question. I love talking about the writing process because my process is so wildly different from all the advice I've gotten over the years, which also served to make me feel really bad about myself. Like, I'm never going to wake up at 5 a.m. and write. I'm never going to sit in front of my computer all day. I'm never going to make a routine, but I will, like, get the shit done, Sorry, I keep swearing. This is so... I think my process was... first outline obsessively, even knowing I'm not going to follow the outlines, just to have this roadmap I'm not going to follow. It was like a security blanket. And then I would set word counts and like for the week, like write 7,000 words a week. I'm making this, maybe it was 10,000. It was too high. And then when I wouldn't hit the word counts, I just wouldn't write at all. I'd be like, okay, well, I didn't make it this week, so I might as well just like exercise. It's like, okay, well, if you didn't exercise like this week, then you're not going to exercise next week. And then I just kept lowering my word count until I knew I could hit it. And I think by the end it was so low that I couldn't not hit it. Like if I wasn't, I was living off this like modest savings that I put aside for wanting to take this time off and do this. And I knew I had maybe like 6 months left where I still had the, open schedule to just have writing be the thing. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to do 3,000 words a week. And that's when the book got done. It's like when I made my writing goal so low that I couldn't not hit it because I had nothing else on my plate, really. And then another big part of my process is like putting an idea in the back of my head and then going and doing something totally different, but like kind of like knowing that my subconscious is picking apart that idea. Like I'd be like, okay, today I'm going to write the Getting Back to San Francisco chapter. Okay, time to go on like a 3-mile hike and blast this really embarrassing playlist that nobody knows I'm listening to. And so I'd like go for a really long walk. This city is just like, the world's best for long walks in any direction. Thank you. It was like the best way to spend the pandemic. And so I'd go on the walk and then I'd sit back at my computer and the stuff would just fly out of me because my subconscious would be kind of unpacking it because I planted the seed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I'm so hit with something that I have to like pull over the car or voice dictate it to myself.
Yep.
Other times I don't write anything for a few days, sometimes like I remember writing a pitch for my book once it was out in the pitch phase at like midnight. I just like woke up and was like, I gotta get this down. So I like tapped it out with my thumbs, but then probably didn't write anything else for the next, 48 hours. Just like very like, it's chaotic, but it works for me. Yeah. Someone once told me my life sounded exhausting to them. And I was like, really? It sounds amazing to me because I just like don't go into an office for 8 hours and produce things and leave. Like, it's
do you journal much or do you write much for, just yourself, not for the public consumption?
This is a really interesting question. I used to journal all the time, like pretty prolifically. My journals were, what helped me write the book, what helped me piece it all back together. In the period of depression, I don't think I wrote at all, but except for these writing sessions I would do at the commune. I'd have people come over and we'd write together, and sometimes I'd write during those workshop sessions, but not really for myself. And then somewhere around early pandemic, my 2 closest friends and I just started talking all day long via text. We use Facebook Messenger because we're like the only people we talk to on that app. So we know when a message comes in on that app, it's from one of us. And I kind of like journal at them now. Sorry, not sorry. I see you in the audience. And it's like really nice to have this running log. I was like trying to pull back from it a little bit this summer. And then the person I called Devin in my book was like, I really miss your anxious musings. Can you start doing that again? And I'm like, really? Because you never reply to them. And she's like, yeah, but I read every word. And so that's kind of my version of journaling now. It's like to an audience, but not really, because they're like, not. And it definitely is like the same reflective process as journaling, I would say. It's just a different medium. And yeah, I mean, if things are like, sometimes like on my birthday or in a new year, like a transition moment, or if I'm going through something really hard, I'll sit and write stuff down, because I think nothing beats a pen and paper. I mean, I really, truly, if you want to write a book and you don't know how to get started, like write with a pen and paper, because then you can't edit yourself, you know?
Mm-hmm. This person asked, Carly, you seem to be an expert as turning weakness into strength. I might add, turning misadventures into memoir. What is your secret?
What is my secret? I don't think I have any secrets. I think for better or worse, I just wildly blab about. Maybe that's my secret, is just like living out loud as much as I can. I think my secret to get this book out was just like, again, lowering my expectations of myself and like loving the parts of myself that I used to hate, like not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's like I can overcome depression, but I'm not going to overcome how much sleep I need. And like, that's okay, because when I'm on, I'm on. So when I'm off, I can really be off.
Yeah.
I think allowing myself to be off, allowing myself to like, one of my dearest friends recently said I was a bed rotter. And I was like, do you know how hard I'm working in that bed? Maybe that.
Yeah. I like this question. You were mentioning your playlist that you listen to on your walks. I know we've talked about both having fathers who are deadheads.
Oh yeah, hi Dad.
You're a big Fish fan.
I'm a huge Fish fan. I don't know why I'm saying that on stage.
How has music helped you in your sobriety journey? And what I'd like to add to this is like, what is it like being in concert spaces and music festivals now as a sober person?
I love that question so much. Thank you, whoever asked that. Music has been just accepting that music is such a massive part of my life without like excelling at music was like a huge part of sobriety. I think before I got sober, I just wanted to like excel at everything. So I didn't like try anything that I couldn't already do. It's kind of like, of course I became a writer. It's the only thing I know how to do. And music is just like this deep inherent love. My earliest memories are of like my dad belting out some Jerry Garcia ballad while mowing the lawn and being like, ew, I hate the Grateful Dead, until I grew up and realized like, they're pretty dope. It's just like I joined, one of the best things that happened to me in the past few years was joining a 90s rock cover band, which is like the lowest stakes thing in my life, because we're not trying to be famous. Some of them are here. Hello, I love you. Yeah, let's go. We're just doing it for fun, and it's just like so awesome to be in this room like screaming out these songs that were the soundtrack to my life, that I still know all the words to, but not trying to like cut an album out of it, not trying to like get a giant, we did have a headlining gig recently actually, so never mind. Never mind. And then I think the concert piece of it, my Fish obsession, my Fish fandom got a grand shove from, I like this band a lot, it's probably my favorite band because I see them whenever they come to town, to, oh my gosh, I'm going to follow this band around the country and see them like an ungodly amount of times every year. And that's actually been a huge part of my sobriety, in that it's like such a way to experience that sort of euphoria, that high, but with your own mind and body, and without, the only input is the music. It just transports you to this other plane. I sound like such a hippie. I don't mean it that way, but and it's like, I said I like cults. Like, it's fun to be part of this like community, and there's a huge sober community. I learned from a really close friend of mine who's been following the band for even longer than I have. They have meetings at the Set Break at every show, and I've made some really good friends from sort of that world, and those two very niche things intersecting. I just like, I think trying to optimize optimize isn't, we're cutting that out of our vocabulary. We're in San Francisco, but trying to make space for joy, and music is just like, my goodness, it is. If we don't make space for that, we don't have a fighting chance on this planet, I think.
Yeah. This person is asking about your experience in Panama. When you talk about it, there's almost like a little bit of embarrassment, but you're also kind of owning it, I think. And I'm curious, if you would have gone back and done that again, but also this person is asking, what do you think you would have missed out on if you didn't do that?
Yeah, I absolutely would. I was doing this someone had done an icebreaker question recently. It was like, do you have any regrets? I forget what the context was. And I mean, the answer is just a strong, resounding no. I can't picture my life it was such a fundamental experience. It was the lowest, one of the two lowest moments of my life, but I would not have this without it. I would maybe have a polyamorous love triangle set against the backdrop of the pandemic that was bad fiction. But I don't have, really, I mean, my only regrets are like, if I've ever hurt someone else, you know, but for myself, like I have reverence and tenderness for the person I was, for overcoming that level of suffering and pain, but through the lens of such wild adventures. Like, it's just, yeah, I really care for my story, and I'm really proud of how it got me here. And I can't say I regret anything, because I can't imagine what my life would have looked like otherwise.
Yeah. Has there been any advice that's been passed on to you that's really stuck with you in your journey to sobriety? Or, you know, for folks, maybe sobriety isn't their goal, but for folks who are, you know, evaluating their relationship with any kind of substance, is there anything that...
Yeah, I think the most important thing that really stuck with me is like, take all advice with a grain of salt. Like, there is no one size fits all to this. So if you ever feel like you're in sort of a fear-based situation or a shame situation and that's not working for you, then like find a new way to do it. There's just no right way the only right way to stay sober, if that's your goal, is to stay sober. You know, the only right way to reduce harm in your life is to reduce that harm. And so whatever your path, like, take what works for you and do that, and let the noise kind of dissolve around you. It can be really hard and really intimidating, especially when you're grasping for solutions and willing to just say, like, take prescriptive, you know, advice. It can be really hard to trust your instincts with that. But for me, it's like my decision to take a step back from sort of the 12-step world a few years ago. I remember feeling really guilty and really conflicted, and then seeing that my relationship to drugs and alcohol remained as it had been when I was doing that. And if I ever feel really shaky, like, I know that's available as a tool, but it doesn't have to be the be all end all. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm interested in that. What kind of made you decide to step a little bit away from that part of the recovery world? Yeah,
I want to be really careful here, because I definitely don't want to trash talk like something incredible that has saved millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of lives. For me, it was the idea of, and I was talking to another recovery person recently where this really resonated, the idea of staying mired in the past in these rooms where it was just constant storytelling about the past, paired with this sort of fear that if you don't do this, it will come back. Both felt really antithetical to how I was living my life. And I know that in order to like keep recovery a part of my life, like, I still really want to prioritize helping anyone I love who's struggling, but I don't want it to be in that necessarily through that framework, if that makes sense. Sure. So that was the main, I think, motivator for that. And just kind of drifting. I do love like 12-step tourism. Like, if you're in a new city and you don't know anyone, like, it's like a secret club. You can kind of just like find interesting people. I love that. I love speaking the language of it. I love knowing that it's there. But I also love like being okay with, you know, not doing it and going back and maybe taking with a grain of salt those, you know, shares from people that say, if I'm not doing this every day, I'm not, you know, staying clean or whatever.
Yeah. Has this experience made you think that you want to continue writing and potentially explore another book?
Oh my gosh, yes, times 1,000,000,000%. I think the biggest surprise of this, I was so scared of writing a book, but I knew I had to do it. And I thought I was going to hate writing the book. And it turns out I just hate promoting the book. And so I'm not going to write a memoir again. I am so sick of pestering people. All of you who are here because I pestered you, thank you so much. I am so excited to try fiction, obviously thinly based on my life because I'm not that creative, but you know, I'm toying with like the local news world as like the setting for my next book. Looking at you two on that one, and you. I'm kind of obsessed with the idea of local news in general as this like entity and as this thing we can't figure out, and as this like essential civic, necessity. So I'd love to kind of dig into that. I also am talking to my oldest friend, who I've known since I was a baby, who I ended up going to high school with. I'm talking to her about writing potentially a pilot show about all-girls school around the Y2K era. So obviously not straying very far, but yeah, I'm so excited to start writing again. I think it was pretty silly to frame a narrative around my own personal experiences and then ask people to like judge it and write reviews about it. But I am so grateful for that this was the book I had to get out before I can kind of start toying with the other stuff.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
So exciting to see.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all also for being here. That concludes our program tonight at the Commonwealth Club World Affairs. Our special thanks again to Carly Schwartz, author of the new book, I'll Try Anything Twice, Misadventures of a Self-Medicated Life. You can find out more about upcoming programs here at Commonwealth at commonwealthclub.org. Also, tune in to KQED at 88.5 FM or online at kqed.org. I'm Sydney Johnson. Have a good night.
Thank you.